When my wife Amelia and I drove back to our valley cabin after months away, we expected peace, quiet, and the sound of the lake brushing against the shore. What we didn't expect was a furious neighbor waiting at the gate. Her name was Linda, but in the neighborhood everyone whispered another name, Karen, with arms crossed and a scowl on her face. Linda shouted, "You can't just live here without joining the HOA for the lake. Everyone follows the rules." Amelia calmly replied, "We don't need to join. This is our property." But Linda wasn't having it. Within minutes she had her phone out, dialing the sheriff. That's when things took a turn. Sheriff Daniels arrived, hat tilted low, hand resting on his belt. "What seems to be the problem?" He asked. Linda spoke first, claiming we were trespassers who refused to obey HOA regulations. She demanded Amelia be forced to sign HOA papers immediately, but when Sheriff Daniels turned to Amelia and asked, "What are your orders, ma'am?" Linda's jaw dropped, you see. Amelia wasn't just a resident here, she was the legal owner of the entire valley, lake included. And in that moment, Linda's power trip crumbled faster than she ever imagined. The road twisted through tall pine trees as our truck climbed higher into the valley. It had been months since Amelia and I last saw the cabin. Months since we'd walked its porch or smelled the fresh pine in the air. This place wasn't just a getaway. It was ours. The cabin. The lake. The entire valley. I was smiling as I pulled up the gravel drive. The sun hit the water and turned it into a sheet of gold. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But peace never lasts long. When Linda Carter is around, everyone in the area knew Linda by another name, Karen. She loved rules, loved control, and loved bossing people around more than anything else. She wasn't in charge of anything, but she acted like she ran the whole valley. And sure enough, there she was, waiting for us like a guard dog at the gate. Arms crossed, lips pressed tight, eyes burning. "About time you showed up," she snapped. "You can't stay here unless you join the HOA for the lake." Amelia stepped out of the truck calmly, her bag still in her hand. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even frown. She simply said, "Linda, we don't need to join. This is our property." Linda took a step closer, finger pointing like a weapon. "Everyone follows the rules. You think you're special?" Amelia shook her head. "No, we just know our rights." That answer didn't sit well with her. Her cheeks flushed red and her hand went straight to her phone. She jabbed at the screen with her finger. "You'll regret this." "I'm calling the sheriff right now," I sighed, because this wasn't the first time. Linda had tried similar tricks before, but never in front of an officer. This time, she thought she could prove something. Minutes later, tires crunched over the gravel road. A dusty county cruiser pulled up, and Sheriff James Daniels stepped out. He was tall, with broad shoulders and calm eyes that had seen every kind of trouble in this county. He shut the door gently and adjusted his hat before speaking. "All right," he said evenly. "What seems to be the problem here?" Linda rushed forward, waving her arms like she was flagging down traffic. "These two just showed up without permission. They're refusing to sign HOA papers. They're breaking the rules of our community. Sheriff, you need to remove them." The sheriff held up a hand. "Slow down. Let me hear their side." He turned to Amelia, who stood steady and unbothered. "And who might you be, ma'am?" "Amelia Miller," she said. "This cabin is mine. This valley is mine. Even the lake. I purchased it all legally years ago. I don't answer to Linda or her HOA." The sheriff tilted his head, reading her calmness. He glanced at me, then back at Linda, who was practically shaking with anger. Then he asked a question that made Linda's jaw fall open. "What are your orders, ma'am?" Silence fell. For a few seconds, even the birds in the trees seemed quiet. Linda's voice finally broke the stillness, loud and shrill. "Orders? What are you talking about? She's not in charge of anything. This is an HOA community." Amelia opened a folder she had carried from the truck. Inside were documents, neatly stacked and stamped by the county clerk. She handed them over. "Here's the deed," she said. "Not only this cabin, but the land surrounding the valley, including the lake. It's all mine. HOA has no jurisdiction here." The sheriff took the papers. He scanned them carefully, flipping each page with a practiced hand. His eyes narrowed, then softened. He gave a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. She's right. The deed is clear. This valley belongs to Amelia Miller. HOA rules don't apply. Amelia turned toward Linda, voice steady but sharp. I've been patient with you. But calling the cops on us for returning to our own home is harassment. You can't intimidate us into joining your HOA's face twisted. This is ridiculous. Everyone follows the HOA rules. You can't just live here and ignore them. What about property values? What about regulations? You'll ruin everything. The sheriff raised a hand. Ma'am, calm down. The Millers are within their rights. I can't enforce rules that don't exist for them. You're wasting my time. Linda stomped her foot like a child. This isn't over. I'll take it to the board. I'll take it to the county. You'll regret this. Take it wherever you want, Amelia said coolly. The law is on our side. The sheriff tipped his hat toward us, then gave Linda a hard stare. I suggest you head home before I cite you for filing false claims. This case is closed, Linda muttered under her breath, spun around, and stormed away down the road. Her angry footsteps crunched against the gravel until she disappeared into the trees. Amelia finally exhaled. I walked up beside her and slipped an arm around her shoulders. The lake sparkled in the late afternoon sun, calm again now that the shouting had ended. You handled that well, I said softly. She smiled faintly. She can scream all she wants, but at the end of the day we own this valley. No one can take that away. The sheriff's cruiser rumbled away, leaving only the sound of crickets and the rush of water. For a moment peace returned. But deep down I knew Linda. She wasn't finished. She never was. Later that evening, as the sky turned purple and stars began to appear, Amelia and I sat on the porch. The air was cool, the valley quiet, but I could see she was still thinking. She's not going to stop, is she? Amelia asked. No, I admitted. But every time she tries, she proves herself wrong. The sheriff saw it. The deed proves it. She can't win. Amelia leaned back in her chair. It's just sad. She could spend her time enjoying this valley, like we do. Instead, she spends it trying to control what isn't hers. I nodded. Some people need control. When they don't have it, they make up rules to feel powerful. But the truth always catches up. We sat quietly, listening to the water against the shore. Fireflies flickered in the darkening trees. For the first time in months, I felt like we were home again. As I looked out across the valley, I thought about the years ahead. There would be more confrontations, more shouting, and maybe even more calls to the sheriff. But the outcome would always be the same. The law was on our side. And Linda's false power would crumble every time. When I finally went inside, Amelia stayed on the porch a little longer. She liked to watch the stars rise over the mountains. And as I turned back one last time, I saw her sitting there with a calm smile. Queen of the valley she rightfully owned, and that's the truth. You can fight with neighbors. You can argue about rules. But at the end of the day, ownership is power. And no HOA Karen can ever change that. The sheriff's words hung in the air, and for a moment even the breeze seemed to pause in the trees. Linda's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to scream but couldn't. Find the sound. Her power was slipping away right in front of her eyes, and Amelia hadn't even raised her voice. Once Sheriff Daniel slowly handed the deed. Papers back to Amelia. You've got everything in order. Ma'am, he said with a nod, your ownership is clear as daylight. And nobody here can force you into an HOA you don't belong to. Linda gasped like he had betrayed her personally. This is insane, she shouted. If they don't join, everyone else has to suffer the consequences. Amelia's calm eyes met hers. Linda, the only consequences here are the ones you're creating, she replied softly. You don't get to bully people into your version of order. Her words were sharp but steady. Like stones placed one after the other to build a wall Linda could never climb. I could see the sheriff trying to keep a straight face as Linda stomped her foot again. You don't understand, Linda screeched. The OA is the law here. No, ma'am, the sheriff corrected firmly. The HOA makes guidelines for properties under its authority, and this valley isn't under its umbrella. The law is what's written in this deed, and I stand by it. Silence followed his words. And the tension in the air cracked like a thunderstorm rolling away over the mountains. Amelia stepped closer to me, but she never looked away from Linda. It was like she knew this was the final blow in a long battle of nerves. Linda's shoulders sagged. but her lips curled with a new kind of threat. This won't end here. I'll talk to the board, I'll talk to the county, she hissed. Do whatever you need to. Amelia answered. We're not afraid of truth. The sheriff tipped his hat one more time and turned toward his cruiser. Mrs. Miller, you have nothing to worry about, he said. And Linda, if I hear another false complaint like this, there will be consequences for you. His voice was low but carried the weight of real authority. The kind that no self-appointed HOA queen could match. Linda spun around, muttering words I didn't catch, and stormed off down the gravel road. Her figure shrank between the trees until she disappeared completely, leaving behind only the echo of her anger. Amelia let out a deep breath she had been holding in. That woman feeds on control, she said quietly. And every time she loses it, she gets worse. I wrapped my arm around her shoulder and looked out across the lake. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm and free, just like it should be. She can scream, she can threaten, and she can run to anyone she wants, I said. But none of that changes the truth. You own this place. It's yours. Amelia smiled faintly at my words, but I could see her mind was still running. She knew this wasn't the last we'd hear from Linda. But she also knew she had stood her ground without flinching as we walked back toward the cabin porch. The valley seemed quieter again. Birdsong filled the air. The breeze carried the fresh scent of pine, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. This was our home, untouched by rules we never agreed to, and in that moment, with Linda gone and the sheriff's words still echoing in the air, Amelia stood taller than ever. Linda didn't just leave quietly after that afternoon. She carried her anger back into her house like a storm bottled up in a jar. For the next few days the valley felt tense, like the calm before lightning cracks across the sky. Every time Amelia and I stepped outside the cabin, we could feel eyes on us, whispers carried across the breeze, doors shutting quickly as we walked by. The other neighbors weren't openly hostile, but it was clear Linda had been busy spreading her version of the story. It didn't take long before we saw the first sign of her next move. One morning as I stepped outside with a mug of coffee, I noticed a new sign hammered into the ground near the edge of the road. Large block letters screamed Private Lake HOA Members. ONLY. Amelia walked up beside me, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She doesn't give up, does she? She said quietly. I shook my head, feeling frustration rise in my chest. This is our lake. Our valley, I replied. She can put up 1,000 signs and it won't change a thing. That evening, a group of neighbors gathered near the lake's edge. Some curious, some nervous. Linda stood in the center, her arms moving wildly as she spoke. She thinks she owns the whole valley, Linda shouted. She thinks she's above the rules, above the community, but we won't let one outsider destroy what we've built. Her words rippled through the crowd like poison, and though many stayed silent, a few nodded hesitantly. Amelia didn't step away from confrontation. Instead, she walked straight down to where Linda was preaching and stood tall, her presence alone enough to quiet the murmurs. You keep calling me an outsider, Amelia said evenly, but it's you who's trying to take what doesn't belong to you. Her voice carried over the water, calm but powerful. Linda's eyes burned with fury. Without the HOA, this place will collapse, she shrieked. Regulations protect us. Keep the property values up, keep order. Amelia raised her hand slightly, silencing her with nothing but authority in her tone. What keeps this valley standing is ownership and truth. The deed says it's mine. Not yours, not your HOA, not your board. The sheriff saw it. The county stamped it, and no matter how many signs you plant or lies you spread, that fact will not change. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some of them turned their eyes away, realizing they'd been dragged into a battle that wasn't theirs. But Linda wasn't done. Not even close. Her voice rose to a near scream. If you refuse to follow the rules, then you don't belong here. We'll block your access. We'll cut off your road. We'll make sure you regret setting foot in this valley. Gasps spread through the group at her threats. Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze steady and unwavering. You don't scare me, Linda, she said, and if you ever try to block our access again, you'll be the one regretting it. The law protects us, and you're walking on dangerous ground with threats like that. For a moment, the two women stood inches apart, one fueled by anger and control, the other by calm resolve and truth. It was a battle of wills, invisible sparks flying in the air between them. Finally, Linda snapped and stormed off. muttering about meetings and lawyers, leaving the neighbors scattered, and uncertain days turned into weeks. And each time we thought Linda had exhausted herself, she came back with a new trick once. She had the road blocked with cones and a chain, forcing us to stop our truck halfway up the hill. Amelia didn't panic. She simply got out, cut the chain with bolt cutters, and drove through without a word. Another time, Linda filed a complaint with the county, claiming we were violating community bylaws. When the inspector arrived, Amelia handed over the deed once again, and the inspector left, shaking his head at the waste of his time. The more Linda fought, the more desperate she became. Her gossip spread to nearby towns, her accusations growing wilder with each telling. She's building without permits. She's damaging the lake. She's ruining the valley. But every claim crumbled under the weight of documented truth. Through it all, Amelia never raised her voice, never lost her composure. Her calm was like a shield, and it drove Linda mad because no matter how loud she screamed, she could never shake her. Sometimes, late at night, Amelia would sit on the porch staring out over the dark valley. "She hates that I won't bend," she whispered once. "People like her survive when others give in, but I won't give her that satisfaction." The conflict wasn't just with Linda anymore. It was with the idea she represented: control, manipulation, the need to dominate others. Amelia was standing against more than a neighbor. She was standing against a mindset that thought power came from intimidation, and every time she refused to bend, she proved that real power came from truth. The valley became a battlefield, without fire or weapons, only words, documents, and stubborn will. Neighbors stopped taking sides because the evidence was clear. Linda's voice grew shriller as her circle of supporters shrank. But she refused to let go. Her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat. One afternoon, as Amelia and I walked near the water, Linda appeared again, her face pale with exhaustion but her eyes still burning. "You may have the papers," she hissed, "but I'll never let you feel welcome here." Amelia paused, the sunlight reflecting on the lake behind her, and answered in a voice that cut through the valley like a bell. "I don't need your welcome, Linda. This valley isn't yours to give." The words hung in the air, echoing against the trees, final and immovable, and for the first time, Linda had no reply. The tension in the valley didn't just fade with time. It grew heavier with every step Linda took against Usher. Obsession was no longer about HOA rules or community guidelines. It was personal now. She wanted Amelia broken, humiliated, and forced to kneel under her version of power. And the more Amelia stood tall, the deeper Linda's rage burned. It all came to a head one late afternoon when the sky turned gray and a storm rolled over the mountains. I was stacking firewood by the cabin when I heard the sound of cars on the gravel road. Not one, but 3 vehicles pulled up, headlights slicing through the misty air. Linda stepped out first, flanked by 2 men in suits and a handful of neighbors who looked nervous just being there. Amelia came out onto the porch, her posture calm but firm, her eyes locked on Linda as if she had been expecting this moment all along. Linda's voice cracked like thunder as she shouted across the clearing, "This ends today. Amelia, you fooled the sheriff, you've tricked the neighbors, but I've brought real authority with me. These men are from the county legal board, and they're here to evict you for trespassing on HOA property." The neighbors gasped, whispers rippling through the group. I felt my chest tighten. But Amelia didn't flinch. She walked down the porch steps slowly, holding a leather folder in her hand, her every movement deliberate, unshaken by the storm or the crowd. "Before you embarrass yourself further, Linda," she said evenly, "why don't we let your lawyers see what I've been holding all along?" She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents, each stamped, signed, and sealed by the county clerk. The 2 suited men stepped forward, their professional masks slipping as they examined the pages. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the paper flipping in their hands. Finally, one of them cleared his throat and turned sharply to Linda. "Ma'am, this deed is valid and binding. The Miller family owns this cabin and the land surrounding it, and the Lake HOA jurisdiction does not apply here at all." The words cut through the clearing like lightning. Linda's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. No, that's impossible," she stammered. "She can't own all of this. She just can't." But the lawyer shook his head firmly. "It's in the county records. There's no legal standing for your claims." Amelia's voice rose, steady and clear. Carrying over the storm, Linda, this valley isn't your kingdom to rule with fear. It's mine by law, and no amount of screaming or scheming will ever change that. The neighbors shifted, some nodding quietly, others avoiding Linda's glare. But it was clear her grip on them was crumbling. Linda's rage boiled over. "You think you've won?" she shrieked. "This isn't over. I'll make your life miserable. I'll make sure no one respects you here. You'll never be welcome." Her words were sharp, desperate, and almost feral, but Amelia stepped closer, her presence so commanding that even the storm seemed to pause around her. "I don't need your welcome, Linda," she said, her eyes burning with quiet fire. "Respect isn't given by bullies or thieves. It's earned by truth and courage. And truth doesn't bow to youth." Lawyer folded the documents back into the folder and handed them to Amelia with a respectful nod. "As far as the county is concerned, this matter is closed," he said. "Any further harassment will have legal consequences for you." Mrs. Carter, for the first time in all the battles we'd faced. Linda's mask cracked completely, her shoulders sagged, her hands trembled, and tears of frustration welled in her eyes. She turned in a fury, shoving past the neighbors who had once stood behind her, and stormed back to her car. The engines roared as the cars pulled away, leaving only the echo of failure behind her. The valley felt different in that silence, lighter, freer, like the air had been cleared of a storm that had hung too long. Amelia stood still, her hair damp from the mist, her folder pressed to her chest, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and victory. I walked up to her slowly, placing my hand on her shoulder. "You ended it," I whispered. She shook her head softly. "No, I just reminded her what she could never take away." That night, as we sat on the porch with lanterns glowing softly around us, the valley stretched quiet and wide under a sky full of stars. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, calm and endless, a mirror of the peace Amelia had fought so hard to protect. "You know she come back in some way?" I said after a long silence. "People like her don't let go easily." Amelia leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "Maybe she will, but every time she does, I'll be here with the truth. And the truth doesn't break." The children's laughter carried faintly from inside the cabin, their voices blending with the gentle chorus of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the trees. This valley was more than land, more than property. It was home, freedom, sanctuary, and it belonged to us. Not because we shouted the loudest, but because we held the truth in our hands and refused to let go. The real climax wasn't Linda's defeat. It was Amelia's unshakable resolve. Through every scream, every threat, and every false claim, she stood tall, calm, and unbroken. And that was what destroyed Linda more than any legal document ever could, because bullies thrive when others bend. But Amelia never bent. She stood like the valley itself, solid, enduring, untouchable. As I looked at her in the lantern light, I realized something deeper than ownership or victory. This wasn't just about land or a cabin or even the lake. It was about power, and where it truly came from. Linda believed power was control, rules, and fear. Amelia proved power was truth, courage, and the will to stand when everyone else would kneel. And in that moment, with the valley stretching quiet around us and the stars burning high above, I knew the battle was finished. Linda could shout into the darkness all she wanted, but this land, this peace, this victory, it was ours, and it always would be. The storm had passed, not just in the sky, but in the valley itself. For the first time since Amelia and I returned to the cabin, the air felt light again, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath of relief. The neighbors who had once followed Linda's voice now walked past our property with quiet nods, some even offering faint smiles of apology. They had seen the truth for themselves, and no amount of gossip could erase what had unfolded that day. Amelia moved through those days with the same calm strength she had always shown, but I noticed a softness in her too. It was as though laying down the final piece of proof had lifted a weight off her shoulders, one she had carried in silence for years. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake in streaks of gold, she sat on the porch beside me and spoke quietly. "I didn't fight just to win against Linda," she said. "I fought so this valley could breathe without chains, without someone claiming power that doesn't belong to them." Her words echoed in my chest. She wasn't just talking about property or ownership. She was talking about freedom itself, freedom to live, to breathe, To walk the land without fear of false authority. Linda had tried to smother that freedom, but Amelia had protected it with truth. Days turned into weeks, and life began to find its rhythm again. The mornings were filled with birdsong, the afternoons with the sound of children playing near the water, and the evenings with quiet laughter drifting from the porch. But even in that peace, reminders of the battle lingered now, and then we would see Linda's car drive slowly past the edge of the property, her face hidden behind dark glasses. She never stopped, never spoke, just drove on with the weight of defeat heavy in her silence. One night under the stars, I asked Amelia if it bothered her to know Linda was still watching. She shook her head gently, her eyes fixed on the constellations above. "She can watch all she wants," she replied, "but watching and controlling are two different things. She lost her control, and she'd never get it back." There was no anger in her voice, only certainty, like the steady rhythm of the river that never stops flowing. The valley itself seemed to respond to that. Shift neighbors who once avoided us began to visit, bringing small gifts from their gardens or just stopping to talk. They no longer feared the wrath of Linda's tongue because they had seen her stripped of her false power, and in their quiet conversations, I heard the beginning of trust being built, not on rules or threats, but on respect and truth. Amelia became something more than just the owner of the valley to many. She was a reminder that courage doesn't need shouting, that strength isn't found in control, but in calm resolve. One neighbor told me softly one afternoon, she stood against Linda like a mountain stands against the wind, and I realized that was exactly what Amelia had become for this place. The mountain that would not move. Linda faded into the background slowly. Like a shadow at sunset, her voice grew quieter, her circle of influence shrinking until it was nothing more than whispers carried on the wind. The HOA meetings still happened, but without power over the valley. They became small gatherings that no longer concerned us. The battle that once consumed every corner of our days was finally over, replaced with the steady rhythm of life in a place truly free. On the last evening of summer, Amelia and I sat by the lake, the children chasing fireflies nearby, the water shimmering with reflections of the rising moon. She looked out across the valley with a quiet smile, her eyes soft but proud. "This land is more than mine," she said gently. "It belongs to every moment we live here, every memory we make, every breath we take without fear." I took her hand in mine and felt the truth of her words settle deep inside. Melinda had tried to claim power she never had, but Amelia had shown where real power lived, not in threats, not in false rules, not in fear, but in truth, in courage, in the quiet strength to stand firm when others would bend. The valley stood silent and vast around us, and in that silence I heard what victory really sounds like. It isn't loud, it isn't filled with shouting. It's the sound of peace, steady and enduring. As the fireflies danced and the stars rose higher, Amelia leaned against my shoulder and whispered one final thought. She never understand that we didn't just win a fight, we protected a way of life. And with that, the valley felt whole again. What would you have done if you were in Amelia's place? Stand firm like her, or try to compromise with Linda? Share your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video from HOA Stories 87, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping HOA encounters.